Coalitions are going to be the most important factor in South Africa's next political era. But fortunately or unfortunately, since the 2021 local government elections, there have been many coalitions across South Africa. These have almost all been omni-shambles. Omni meaning in every direction at once. But coalitions are this country's political future. They're kind of our present already. And if the ANC drops below 50% plus one voters in 2024, they're going to need to form a coalition with one or a few smaller political parties to govern South Africa. So let's talk about coalitions, why they've been such a disaster in South Africa so far, what needs to change for them to work, and how does all of this affect your vote in next year's general elections. So, 2024, what do we know? The ANC will definitely get the most votes. It would take an almost historically unprecedented swing in voters to a new political party to unseat the ANC. The DA would have to jump 30%, the EFF would have to jump 40%, they're only around 11 or 12. The ANC is going to have the most votes, but in 2024, they might get below 50% plus one voter. They'll have to go into coalition with a smaller political party. And the reason why this episode is happening at all is because a few weeks ago, we were forced to watch that absurd media circus waste of time of a conference to create a moonshot-packed national coalition for governance of South Africa by the DA, the Freedom Front Plus, the IFP, Action SA, and then a bunch of you've never heard of them political parties. And I got so infuriated that this conference was happening at all. Ask Siri to show you a waste of time and she'll show you a picture of this Moonshot Coalition conference packed. We don't even really know what it was. They don't even know what it was. So for 6 months to a year, a bunch of politicians have forced us to listen as they dreamed in this fantasy land of the Rainbow Coalition or the Moonshot Coalition pact to save South Africa, obviously from the ANC. Every single political party in the opposition, pretty much their whole shtick, they exist. They appeal to their voters by saying the ANC is the worst thing ever. We can stop them. And to be clear, it's a very effective shtick. The ANC have been a governance disaster through crime, corruption, and just lack of care, lack of interest in maintaining South Africa, just decay everywhere because of the African National Congress, and everybody is very upset with them. And a bunch of political parties decided that they would try to create this dream moonshot coalition where they could all club their votes after 2024 and unseat the ANC, until just a few weeks before the conference when a bunch of very reasonable people said, but your group is nowhere near being able to unseat the ANC. The ANC will get around 50, maybe a little bit below. But remember, Ramaphosa is by far the most popular politician, more popular than all political parties in South Africa. The ANC has struggled in local government elections recently, which is why we have so many coalitions, but he's going to drag them up. So maybe the ANC will drop below 50, but then you'd have to get every single other minority party in South Africa to sign on to this insane coalition. And you're never going to do that unless you try to work with the party that you have been selling as the demon spawn, the greatest, worst, most evil threat, led by the devil incarnate himself, worse than the ANC, much worse, the EFF and Julius Malema. Because all of these parties' anti-ANC shtick has also been keep the EFF out at all costs. But now you can't invite them to your conference because your whole agenda that has got people to vote for you is never the EFF under any circumstances. So in the weeks before the conference, they tried to reposition it. They tried to make it seem like, oh, it's not really anti-ANC. It's more about governance and what we would do if this coalition came to power. But this coalition represents less than 30, maybe, % of the vote. My grandmother could assemble her book club and they could speculate about what they would do if they came to power. And that would have about as much weight as these captains of foolishness wasting our time a few weeks ago. And a lot of them hate all the other political parties. We had the DA and Action SA, who really dislike each other. Action SA came out of nowhere with Herman Mashaba and took a bunch of DA voters. You've also got the Inkatha Freedom Party and the Freedom Front Plus at one table. The VF Plus in Carter's voters' eyes is the last horcrux of apartheid. If you haven't seen Harry Potter, I'm sorry, that did make sense. And the DA is the second last horcrux. So I could not understand why they did this. And then at the very end, they tried to say, no, this conference was actually about inspiring young people to vote, giving them hope, which no one was buying. Nobody even knows what the conference is about, why they were there, what they were trying to achieve. They changed the message tons of times. What a waste of time. Okay, calm down, Dan. Recenter. This is about coalitions. So unfortunately, these days when South Africans think of coalitions, they think of that mess. But we really need to be thinking about what coalitions are likely going to be from 2024 onwards in local elections, but particularly in national if the ANC falls below 50% plus one. And so let's look at how local coalitions have played out in the last few years in different places in South Africa to try and learn a few things about what might happen from 2024 onwards and how we should vote considering that information. And your local governance through coalition has been really rough. So in quite a few places across South Africa, the ANC has performed poorly in local government elections, and this is quite a common thing actually, where parties perform differently nationally versus locally, because in general, when you're going for a national election, people are voting thinking about the president, and that's where Ramaphosa's popularity becomes super useful for the ANC. But in local government elections, you're thinking more about what you've seen the party and its representatives be able to do in your area. And so if you've got an ANC that's far less popular as a party than their president, they perform worse in local government elections. But the ANC in most places in South Africa still gets the most votes, even if they don't get a majority. So that has led to three common scenarios across the country. The first scenario is when the ANC falls just short of a 50% plus one majority of the vote. And so they find a small, tiny political party whose voters can just, when added with the ANC, push them over the 50% plus one line, and they give them a high position of power in the ruling structure so that the party plays along. Good example of this is the UDM in Gqeberha in the Eastern Cape, where the ANC essentially just installed a puppet mayor because the UDM had virtually no traction themselves, had just enough of a vote to help the ANC push over 50, and the ANC said, sure, you can be the mayor, we will just decide everything that you do. And you can understand from the smaller party's perspective why this would be a once-in-a-lifetime, never-expected wildest dream come true. Because in the UDM, you have no chance of ever getting a position of prominence. And then suddenly, a huge party comes along and gives you a highly powered position, high profile in the media to raise your own kind of prestige, and makes you well paid. And that has happened fairly often. We've seen lots of puppet mayors across the country in the last 2 years. But in a situation where the ANC only needs one coalition partner, it works out nicely for them. They get to install a really weak party and its weak member as a puppet mayor who just has to do everything that the ANC tells them to do, because if they don't, the ANC will remove them. And then the ANC can get away with doing very little good and doing very little work in those areas because they have the punching bag if and when things go wrong. Now, the ANC will never install a coalition partner as the president nationally if they need a small coalition partner in 2024, but they may well offer a ministerial position or something similarly powerful that suits them to get a coalition partner on board. We've actually seen Ramaphosa give a ministerial position to an opposition party leader already, Patricia de Lille from the Good Party, but he didn't need to do that. The ANC had 50% majority plus one voter. He did that to kind of just remove a really difficult thorn in his side, because Lord knows Patricia de Lille is an amazing opposition politician, throws a bunch of cuck on the ruling party, and this was just a beautiful way to get her on the ANC side. So that's scenario one. Scenario two is slightly different, but the ANC still gets most of the votes. They just need a bigger small party to partner with to actually get over 50% plus one. And this is where overwhelmingly we've seen them partner with the economic freedom fighters, but then neither party wants to give the other party the mayoral position, so they find a third, even smaller party and again install a puppet mayor. And it works out in a very similar way. The puppet mayor has to do everything that the ANC and the EFF want. The ANC and EFF give themselves powerful positions in the city or the town's leadership structure. And again, they have a punching bag if anything goes wrong. It doesn't matter to the ANC and the DA how good or competent or experienced their puppet mayor is. They don't care. It doesn't matter to them. And so they just shop around for whatever tiny political party is willing to do their bidding. And in Johannesburg, it was Al Jama. You may never have heard of them before. Don't worry. Very few people have. They're a Muslim interest political party in Johannesburg who got like 60,000 votes in the last local government election in the whole of Johannesburg. Over 5.5 million people. Only 60,000 votes. 60,000 votes isn't enough to get you top 10 of South African Idol, but it was good enough to get them 3 council seats in the city of Johannesburg. And so when the ANC and EFF needed a puppet mayor, they called up Al Jama, and they kind of just went for the first name that popped up from the Al Jama list, which was only 3 names, I will remind you. They went with Tapelo Ahmad. And we rapidly, over the following weeks, discovered that Tapelo Ahmad was completely incompetent, didn't know what he was doing, didn't even know what the job of mayor was. He kept making these ridiculous gaffes in media interviews, and eventually he had one with prominent SABC journalist Sakina Kamwendo where he made such a fool of himself that he had to go. So they got rid of him. So what did the ANC and EFF do next? They just went with the next Al Jama mayor. That's who we have at the moment, Kabelo Gwamanda. He doesn't really know what he's doing either. And the city of Johannesburg suffers. This Al Jama Johannesburg story actually reveals a deeper problem that the economic freedom fighters might have, because the EFF are very opportunistic wherever they feel like governing across the country. The EFF tries to humiliate the ANC at every opportunity, nationally at least. But locally, in some places, they're very happy to go into coalitions so that they can get a sense of authority, so that they can present themselves as mattering as a real political party because they're in a ruling coalition, so that they can get positions in mayoral structures or city leadership structures for their members. But the EFF trying to find an opportunity everywhere causes problems. When they were electing Tapelo Ahmad with the ANC, they wanted the Inkatha Freedom Party in Gauteng and Johannesburg to vote with them for the Al Jama mayor. But the IFP in Gauteng didn't want to do that. And then the EFF got extremely upset with the IFP and threatened to pull out of coalitions that the EFF and IFP have in KwaZulu-Natal to keep the ANC out. Because yes, EFF and KZN goes into a lot of power sharing agreements with the IFP to thwart the ANC. So that's a problem that you have when you don't have consistent positions across local and national bodies in different areas of the country. And now the third scenario with coalitions, and we've particularly seen this in Johannesburg and in Tshwane, where smaller opposition parties besides the EFF, the kind of parties that may have been at that ridiculous conference 2 weeks ago, they together get enough votes such that if they combine effectively and make an alliance, they can rule. And we've seen this happen, but it's not been pretty. In Johannesburg, Mpho Phalatse was made mayor. DA candidate, all the opposition parties beyond the ANC and the EFF clubbed together. But that ruling coalition was always vulnerable because if even one of the smaller political parties, like for example the Patriotic Alliance, was enticed away by the EFF or the ANC, then that coalition would fall apart. And so Mpho Phalatse and the DA's job was to keep everybody in that coalition happy. They failed to do so. Technically, twice failed. So Mpho Phalatse is shown the exit door. And then all these opposition parties get together and say, let's find a new candidate that we can all get behind to keep power for ourselves and push the ANC and the EFF out. And they settle on Mfundzi Ngubeni, who's the Action SA candidate. And all seems well until just before the vote when the DA says, actually no, screw you all, it's our way or the highway, we want to put Mpho Phalatse back in power, you all have to vote for her, we're not voting for Mfundzi Ngubeni. Which is crazy. Mpho Phalatse already failed twice to keep this coalition together. All the other political parties were like, but we're happy with Mfundzi Ngubeni. The DA said, well then, screw it. That coalition fell apart because the DA wouldn't vote for Ngubeni, the rest of the parties wouldn't vote for Phalatse, and that meant that the ANC and the EFF could make an approach for a small political party in that ex-coalition, pull them across to the other side, and install their puppet Al Jama mayor. So that was literally a moment where the DA chose their self-interest over the people of Johannesburg because they could, with their coalition, with them as the loudest voice in their coalition, made that Mfundzi Ngubeni mayorship work. They could have tried to form a functional government that actually would have tried to have done good for the city of Johannesburg, but instead they said, screw that, we are only going to go for our candidate or no one else, knowing full well that that meant the Al Jama puppet mayor. And I'm not letting the other smaller political parties off the hook here either. They also chose that rather than work with the DA. And this is how this third scenario gets very rough. because all of these opposition parties don't want to help each other. They want to become the dominant opposition party. The DA is willing to use smaller political parties to their benefit, but the second they're no longer useful or start to threaten the DA, then there's no more of that. It's almost certain that the DA chose not to back Vunzigubeni because they don't want to give Action SA legitimacy. Their rival, their kind of offshoot, the Herman Mashaba walkaway and new project that's taken many of their voters in Gauteng. Now you make him mayor, and the mayor who is Action SA does a decent job that only does well for Action SA's profile. But it means we're not getting good solutions from the third scenario. And so witnessing the attempted coalitions or the non-attempted coalitions in the last few years has been a really awful experience. And we as voters, as citizens, as people with voices in our families, communities, workplaces, online, on social media, whatever, really need to start taking local coalitions seriously, voting in local government elections, and setting an agenda to tell political parties how to handle themselves. We need to demand that parties have consistent, transparent principles, both nationally and locally. We need to force parties to attend to the quality of their members in local government to make sure that the crucial functions of cities and towns work properly. And we need to force political parties to always be openly working for the best interests of the people, not themselves. And hopefully that will then make them realize that when they work for the best interests of the people, they do work for themselves. Because even if they're not directly in the power seat, their actions show that they're working for everyone's best interest. And then we will reward them at the ballot box. So that's the issue with coalitions. Thank you so much for watching. I know that it's a lot, but as everyone keeps saying, it is literally our future, and the political establishment is screwing around and screwing it up, and we need to intervene. Next episode of The Issue comes out next week, and if you really like this video, please subscribe, tell your friends, and if you want to listen to an even more comprehensive analysis, every single episode of The Issue comes in video form on YouTube and also in podcasts, so you can catch us on Spotify, and we're on all the social medias. See you in a week.